Yeah, so hi everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ignatius Rigger. I'm a CI scientist at the University of Washington, and I study mostly sea ice. I was going to give an update on the IBP. I should acknowledge my collaborators. I see quite a few people from the National Ice Center who co-manage the U.S. Interagency Arctic Buoy Program with us, and Psy Question, and also John Woods, who's part of Icepaper, which he's going to talk about. The other logos on the bottom are various funders. We have strong support from most U.S. agencies. A new one is the North Slope Bureau Search and Rescue team out of UKDIAVIK. And there are a lot of people who contribute to the IBP in one way or another. And I just list those as the participants of the International Arctic Buoy Program. Oh, come on, where's my next slide? So for those of you who don't know us, we maintain the fundamental observing network on the Arctic Ocean. So sea level pressure, ocean ice circulation, temperature of one sort or another. The U.S. Interagency manages most of the U.S. contributions to the IBP. In the larger group, we have 36 different institutions from 12 different countries, including the European Meteorological Network and the World Climate Research Program. If we list buoys by type, we have the fundamental buoys of like automatic weather stations, with a picture in the upper right. In the picture just to the left of that, right of that, we have a RACS, which is remote Arctic camera system, and then a seasonal ice mass balance buoy, which is deployed by Dunn, Krell, and others that were standing up on the right side of that picture. We also deploy a lot of buoys using Coast Guard assets. And the picture in the middle left is an airborne expendable seasonal ice beacon. And then to the right of that is a Woods Hole ice tethered profiler. So we have buoys at the top of the ocean through the sea ice with IMBs, and then ITPs, which profile down into the ocean. And then we also deploy a lot of ice trackers. Basically, we're trying to keep track of icebergs and multi-year sea ice across the Arctic Ocean, and we deploy these easily deployable buoys. They're basically, slightly bigger than a beach ball, and they don't need a parachute. And then we also deploy a lot of SVPBs, which are deployed in all the world's oceans. But given the increasing amounts of open water in the Arctic, this is probably half our network now. So I won't go through all the other collaborators in this, but we list them on the right side there. Our plans for last summer were pretty extensive. There was over 15. I probably missed some here. Deployment opportunities. Oh, the numbers disappeared from the map. But we usually start in the spring with March deployments out of Barrow, the Navy ice camps, and then through the summer we'll still land on the ice and then airdrop from various aircraft, and then in the late summer and fall the icebreakers start coming in. Last year, despite COVID, we still deployed over 124 buoys, so that's just normal buoys, and I've separated out the mosaic buoys from that, which brings our total to over 200. There were so many buoys deployed by Mosaic. I know I'm going to miss them, so I'm not going to even try to count them. And then we had a few trips that were canceled during the pandemic, but overall we still did pretty well. At the end of the field season in 2020, we had most of the Arctic covered, as you can see on the right side of as you can see on the map. But on the right side, you can see that the Eurasian Arctic isn't covered as well as the American side of the Arctic, and I'll cover that a little bit more later. Last trip into the Arctic last season was by the KV Svalbard. Our collaborators at NERSC went back in for KTEX and AMOS to support ONR projects, and deployed quite a few buoys for us. So the green track shows their route. But one thing that they also did was deploy some wooden boats, which is an outreach project that Dave Vercucci is going to talk about more in a little bit. Our plans for 2021 are pretty similar. Lots of we were trying to get a late winter deployment by the U.S. Air Force, but that was canceled due to COVID and pushed off till next year. And then all the other deployments are pretty similar to 2020. And later on, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But one thing that we are doing is we're leveraging quite a bit of Icepaper, which John's going to talk about next. Oh, wait, one more slide. One thing that's been different this year is there's icebergs on the North Slope, and we put a lot of effort this year to tag them. There was 2 clusters near Barrow shown by the middle map. There's arrows pointing to the clusters, and then world view images, which are crazy and wonderful, in that we could see the icebergs and do a lot of planning and get a pretty good feel for how big these things were. And then the white cluster in the lower middle is Psy Question is going to talk about that, but that was an outreach project that we have going. All right, so quick map of the current status. We have a lot of buoys in the Arctic, over 100, but the recurring gap on the Eurasian Arctic is growing. I'll cover that more later. In the meantime, I'll switch off to John and to talk about Icepaper.
All right, thanks, Ignatius. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, I apologize, everyone. I don't have the camera. I'm sitting in a conference room at the Sea Air Space Symposium in DC, so no Wi-Fi to get on the Zoom call, so I apologize. So my name is John Woods. I work for the Office of Naval Research Global, so we're the international arm of ONR. And I'm going to give a quick brief about Icepaper, and you'll hopefully see throughout the brief how it ties back into the International Arctic Buoy Program. But so what is Icepaper? First off, it stands for the International Cooperative Engagement Program for Polar Research. That's the acronym. I know it's a mouthful, but it's a multilateral. So we have 7 nations involved in this: the U.S., Canada, the Nordics, so Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland, as well as New Zealand, so bipolar, both north and south, doing some Antarctic research with the Royal Defense Forces. It was just signed last November, so the MOU was just recently signed. It's a DoD MOU, but all government agencies can use it. So we've had meetings with National Science Foundation, NOAA, DOE, NASA. Anyone that's doing polar research, again, both poles, we'd like to try to get engaged in Icepaper. We actually have an IARPIC self-forming team, which I probably haven't been as active on as I'd like to be. And I think some of the discussion that we're going to have today is, how can IARPIC and Icepaper kind of work more closely together in the future? And at least I think I have some ideas for that. So that's sort of the what is Icepaper. Next slide, please. You can see the potential collaborations. For this group, the environmental monitoring, meteorology, hydrography, oceanography probably makes the most sense. I'd really like to talk or get more involved on the modeling side, or get the folks that are working Icepaper issues on the modeling side tied into more of the sea ice modeling team. I think there's a lot of room for the sea ice team and the observations team, as Ignatius is talking, to do more engagement. So like I said, we have these working groups that sort of cover these areas. You'll hear me talk about project arrangements, or PAs, a lot. These are basically, 3 to 5 year projects where each nation will bring an equitable amount of resources, and it doesn't necessarily have to be cash. I can use the example with the Canadians. They have Operation Nanook every year that they do up on the North Slope, or over on the Canadian side in the Beaufort, and we participated in that, getting sensors out, doing some R&D testing, et cetera. Through this sort of cooperation collaborative program. The next slide shows sort of who leads all the working groups. So hopefully folks recognize Dr. Tom Douglas. He's up at Krell Fairbanks. He leads the environmental working group. Dr. Patrick Mason at ONR, he leads the human performance working group. They're more focused on clothing and nutrition, things like that for survivability in the Arctic. We have a platforms working group led by the NAVC folks. That's a little bit more focused on ships and terrestrial platforms right now, so it's probably not too much IARPIC crossover there. but the environment is always involved. That's kind of weaved through each of the working groups. And then finally, there's a situational awareness working group led by Church Key up at the Arctic Domain Awareness Center. And again, this is in all services, so we have Army and Air Force representation. But what I'd really like to see, sort of my goal for 22 and beyond, is getting more of the interagency engagement going. So again, with NOAA, NASA, NSF, and others. The next slide just shows a little bit more of a detailed breakdown as to what the working groups are working on. So again, in the environment, looking at modeling and observations, as well as contaminants. So this is the Army's, one of their big issues is looking at soil contamination in the Arctic and how that's being affected with the warming. And then you can see some of the breakdowns of the other working groups of what some of the specific sub areas that they're working on. So what is a working group? Next slide, sorry. They try to meet monthly, somewhat regularly. I know this group probably meets definitely more regularly. We do have a terms of reference, so all the terms of reference does is just give guidance as to what we can release within each of the working groups into other countries. We had U.S. only and international meetings. So again, I would almost see the Sea Ice IARPIC meeting as possibly being a host to an Icepaper environmental observation meeting in the future, or sort of how we're doing here today. Again, we're trying to develop these sub-working groups to kind of be more focused and help to prioritize what these future projects would look like. And again, I want to keep kind of beating the drum that other government agencies can participate in Icepaper. This is not just a DoD effort. I'll use an example with the Danes that we work with. We work with their Danish military, but then we're also working really closely with the Danish Meteorological Institute, or DMI, on this upcoming iceberg tagging project that we're doing. So that's sort of the Icepaper 101. Like I said, we do have a self-forming team, so I'd love for folks to join that. And I'll work with Melinda to see how we can kind of cross-pollinate and collaborate even more. So thanks for that time. And I've got to hop off at the bottom of the hour here, but if Ignatius knows how to get a hold of me, or if Ignatius knows you can type my email in the chat, that'd be great. So thanks.
Thanks, John. Just to show a couple slides of our deployments related to Icepaper, this map shows, March 2021 buoy array, and then the different holes that we're trying to target using Icepaper assets. The main priority is to fill up the weather network, and so we're trying to get flights out to the Eurasian side of the Arctic, and then there's recurring gaps also on the American side, shown by the yellow circles. And then a couple new things is there's a lot of icebergs and ice islands in the high Arctic, just north of the Canadian archipelago. There's quite a few that's been identified by the North American Ice Service, and we'll try to put a bunch of ice trackers on that. And then also out of Disco Bay, as John mentioned, we have this iceberg tagging experiment with a Danish Navy ship. We're going to be flying out there next week, actually, and dropping GPS tags and some net buoys in the area. So this is the proposed cruise track, but I think we have some leeway on that track now. Basically, we're going to circumnavigate Disco Island, and we have 100 trackers that we're bringing out with us, and we're going to try to land them using drones to tag the icebergs. This is just a radar image from a couple years ago. You can see some of the icebergs in the radar and how they're moving. And then there's this recurring plan to try to get flights out of Inuvik and Sachs Harbor. The last 2 years have been canceled. We hope to have another trial run at Great Slave Lake, and possibly even out to Sachs and Inuvik in 2022. And yeah, there's options to deploy quite a few buoys. We'll deploy our standard ice mass balance and the slight and ice mass balance buoy that Psy's going to talk about in a little bit. So please let us know if you have some ideas for other things we might be able to deploy on any of these flights, actually. So a lot of these plans with Icepaper are recurring each year. The 2021 flights are what we're doing this year. But yeah, we hope to have these again in 2022. So transition to Dave Vercucci to talk about some of our outreach.
Thanks, Ignatius. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dave Forcucci. I work with the U.S. Coast Guard Cutter Healy, I'm a marine science coordinator. And this project started in 2015, and there's a backstory, but anyway, the bottom line is we get kids to decorate these small wooden boats, which are cut by the Center for Wooden Boats in Seattle. So it's we're talking about collaboration here. This is kind of a collaboration of a bunch of different groups, and so here you can see the kids. This is at the Pacific Science Center. Kids decorating the wooden boats. And if you can go to the next, oh, okay. And just to give you the, there's some, if you go back one, there are some websites there. There's Facebook. We have a Facebook site and a website on the right there. Next slide. So these wooden boats get stamped. You can see in the middle there with it's burned in the website. So if they're found, they can be reported. And this is just gives you an example of one of the ones that was decorated by the kids. Next slide. So I'm just going to zip through here real quick. So the idea is we get the kids to decorate, and when we bring them up to the Arctic, we put them on the ice with these vessels, whether it's the Healy or other vessels. This photos with the Healy. And then the collaboration is we put a SVP, one of Ignatius's buoys with it, so we can track the boats on the ice in the short term. Next slide. This past year in 2020, I don't know if anybody heard about the Healy motor failure. So the Healy wasn't able to deploy boats last year because they had a mechanical problem, and we had to cancel all the Arctic cruises. Fortuitously, we had a collaboration with the Norwegians on the Svalbard, and that collaboration was actually to do the boats, to put out boats. They wanted to work with us on the outreach. And so they brought the wood boats from 2020 up into the Arctic, and they deployed them at 3 sites. And this is the Svalbard group on the ice in the East Arctic during the summer cruise. Next slide. So this shows the deployment of wooden boats in the Arctic. We did it in 2015, and those you can see Healy during the GeoTraces cruise deployed, yep, along the 149 line. And then you can see the 2020 Svalbard deployments. And so it's a long story, but they went out in the fall and went through the Northeast Passage and went all the way over to the West Arctic and retrieved the Cadex moorings in the West Arctic that Healy was supposed to recover, because they couldn't because of the casualty. So it was a pretty amazing trip that they did. And along the way, they deployed 3 locations where boats were put out. And Ignatius has described it like, and they also put out wood boats. Well, I would say they put out wood boats and they also deployed SVP buoys. So here's a outreach facilitating some deployments of buoys. And if you notice that top KV Svalbard pin on the map, if anybody's familiar with the Fram expedition, the Norwegians came up with that deployment spot, which was really cool because that's where the Fram iced in about 125 years ago. So we got to follow, and of course we're following the SVP tracks at these spots. So next slide. So then hopefully the boats wash up. This was one that washed up in 2020 on a fjord in Iceland. This was deployed, the boat itself was deployed in 2015. So, you know, they showed that the boats can survive 5 years drifting around all these areas. So next slide. And these are the boats that have been reported. So up in the upper left there are actually 3 pins on those remote fjords there on the northwest tip of Iceland. So there's been 5 from 2015 that have been recovered. And we just had one from 2020 that the Svalbard put out in the East Arctic, recovered on that same northeast or northwest remote fjord area in Iceland. Next slide. This just shows just quickly, you know, some of the outreach groups. The good thing is in 2021, we did it this year, and we engaged the Seattle Public Schools, which is really great because they were wanting to, the kids in the class, middle schools are going to be doing, they want to continue with it. And so that's great. And we've got some on the Healy for 2021, and then a Russian icebreaker supporting the Nabos cruise. We've got some boats to be put out in the Arctic on that ship. Next slide. Yeah, collaboration, a lot of collaborators, and next slide. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Dave.
Sure.
So I'm going to transition to a new effort by Psy Question about light and ice mass balance buoys and more outreach.
Hey, can you hear me okay, Ignatius?
Yep.
Hi, everyone. My name is Psy. I'm a professor in the Department of Art at the University of Maryland, and I've been working with John and Ignatius since 2018. And my goal is to kind of take some of the data that they're using or they're creating and create new data, and then find ways of sharing that with the general public through art and kind of outreach projects. So this is just one example, but a pretty fun one. So here on the left, we have the deployment from this, excuse me, from this May. And there's a Pelican case there with some electronics that I've been working on for quite a few years, and then some sensors that actually go down through the ice. So in the middle, there's a diagram there showing this set of sensors, and it's basically 2 kind of long circuits that go through the ice. One side has temperature sensors every 2 centimeters, and then the other side has RGB IR, so basically a light, color, and infrared sensor every 5 centimeters on the flip side. And so with that, it's kind of a low cost ice mass balance buoy with it between the temperature and the light. Most of the time we can kind of figure out where the snow and air and sea ice and ocean are. I think you can go to the next one, Ignatius. And then these are just 2 projects that I'm doing with that data. So I like to work in a one-to-one scale where the thing that you're seeing in person in a gallery setting is like the same size as the ice or whatever is being measured. So over the summer, I put up the sculpture on the left, which is it's an acrylic tube that's about 12 feet tall, that has 1,000 LEDs in it, and then it just displays the data from that day. So it was really great to have those sensors that we put out in May still reporting during this June 18th to 27th that the festival was happening down in Santa Fe. And so every day I would upload a new set of data to the sensor. And so that at the top there, you can see that that's the air where it's kind of white color. And then the deeper blue is the sea ice thickness. And then lower part, that kind of lower quarter is the ocean. And I introduced some kind of flicker into the ocean. And then we had this really interesting thing happen where there was an algae bloom that took place, we think, underneath the ice. So there was a few hints of red in there as well. And then I'll be doing a similar piece at the Victoria Albert Museum in London. They have this digital design weekend in September. The focus this year is on climate change. And so I don't actually get to go there and put up that piece, but we're working with their team to have a series of monitors that will still display this full scale. And then I think for that one, I'm gonna kind of do an animation that shows several months of the data. So this is a kind of technical way to think about art, but I think it's pretty fun and it's great for people to be able to stand next to this thing and understand that they're standing next to a kind of facsimile of the sea ice floating on the ocean and that the data just came in that day. And I also support John and Ignatius in the IABP with kind of custom hardware, and I make kind of fun, low-cost things to kind of test out our different missions. So last week I was in Kansas with the Aero team there, kind of testing all of the different drone deployed GPS trackers that we're going to be using in Greenland. And so that stuff's pretty exciting as well. I think that's all I got.
Thanks, Psy. Let's see. So I was going to wrap up really quick since we're running short on time. So I mentioned this already. We have the recurring hole on the Eurasian side of the Arctic, and that's a big part of my job is trying to fill that hole. So one of the big efforts we have is with the Arctic and Antarctic Research Institute in St. Petersburg. We've purchased 20 buoys to be deployed from Russian icebreakers in, along mostly in the Russian EEZ, which is key because that's as far upstream in the transpolar drift stream as we can get. The pictures on the right show deployments from some of the ships and their helicopters from last year. Most of those have drifted in the transpolar drift stream, and you can kind of see some of them, in this area here. But given the prevailing winds and ocean currents, it's a really tough neighborhood to make deployments in. So if we could get deployments like from the U.S. Air Force and leverage Icepaper to get out there during the winter, that would be wonderful in maintaining the array throughout the year. We mentioned Nebos, Igor Polyakov's cruise to the Russian Arctic. There's the cruise map. Got these yellow, red, and white diamonds. We'll be deploying quite a few buoys. There'll be clustered buoys at the white diamonds, which would have Woods Hole ice tethered platforms and some Krell IMBs, SIMBs. And then most of the SVPs are going to go as far inland or towards land as we can get them. But there's a requirement to be, just along the EEZ, and you can kind of see that blue line there, and that's the area that we need to stay out of, basically. So 13 buoys there, 20 with the ARI, but we also plan to leverage the Seasonal Ice Zone Reconnaissance Survey Program. This is Jamie Morrison, Axel Schweiger, Mike Steele, and others. I collaborate in that. When they're going, it's nice to have company, and I'll deploy buoys with them for the International Arctic Buoy Program. Basically, they fly, the C-130 comes out of Kodiak, we fly up north and usually fly the 150 west line. On the way out, we'll fly low and drop ocean profilers and buoys. On the way back, we'll fly high and drop drop-sons for Axel Schweiger and Zheng Liu. Let's see, and so to complement that, and so we have a hole in the meteorological drifting network, but we also have holes in the ocean, and so like as part of the motivation for search, there's that big change in the Makarov Basin, and so as part of Scissors and Icepaper, we're going to try to deploy more CTDs, airborne expendable CTDs, and fly to the Baccarat from from Barrow, Alaskan side, but also use the Air Force to fly from Greenland and Resolute out to the Baccarat Basin, and then deploy buoys and ocean profilers, AXCTDs in this area to get more obs. Let's see, I'll skip that slide. Okay, so our biggest efforts to fill that big hole on the Russian side. The Healy just deployed these 3 buoys. They're doing ice trials, so they should be up in the Chukchi Sea by now. Scissors usually does the 150 line, but we'll also do this line hopefully at the end of August to get more ocean samples on that side. I briefly mentioned our iceberg tagging experiment here around Disco Bay. There's actually a few other groups up there that we're collaborating with that are tagging icebergs, like the Lauriers in this area. The Canadian Air Force will be tagging icebergs up north of the archipelago. But yeah, as a group, it's a pretty big emphasis for the Arctic Buoy Program. And this last slide is our challenges in summary. You know, on the left there's a map that Jun Inoue published in 2009. It basically highlights a need for observations in the Arctic. The big red spots on the left map are basically where we don't have buoys, and the error in the sea level pressure fields are highest, up to 2 millibars. And given that the sea level pressure field and the pressure gradient drive the winds, that affects our ability to, to follow changes in mass and heat across the Arctic Ocean. And if we took all the buoys out, as shown on the map on the right, basically we don't know which way the wind is going. To address these challenges, we're leveraging Icepaper and collaborations with the Royal Canadian Air Force, Royal Danish Air Force, US Air Force, Coast Guard, everybody we can work with to get out to these areas. And last slide, basically this is all our US interagency collaborators. And if I try to capture all the larger Arctic Buoy Program folks, everything would be like really small. Anyway, any questions?
Hey, thanks a lot, Ignatius and Dave and Psy. That was a really nice presentation, and honestly quite impressive to see what you all have accomplished last year despite the pandemic. So I'd like to open it up to questions, and I see one in the chat, and if other people want to chime in with questions, please raise your hand or just ask, but I'll start with the question from Bjorn, and this is for Ignatius. Are there any real-time transmitting stress sensors deployed, or are there aspirations to include such devices on the ice mass balance buoys?
Is there a Krell person on board?
Hi, Ignatius, this is
online?
Don.
Oh, there's Don. Okay, cool.
Yeah. There aren't any right now, but it would be straightforward to do.
Oh, we lost Don.
No, yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, now
Okay. So yeah, right now we don't have any stress sensors on buoys, but it would be fairly easy to have either add them to an SIMB or just have a standalone stress sensor buoy. In the past, we've used them in a kind of a semi-autonomous mode, where instead of sending it up to the satellite, they send it back to a camp. But it's not being done now, but it would be fairly easy to do.
Yeah, and so there's, and to add a little bit more on that, there's a sea ice dynamics experiment, which is Chris Poloshinsky, Jenny Hutchings, Andy Mahoney. Melinda, you're part of this too, right?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
I'm
anyway,
slightly part of it.
Yeah, they're deploying thick clusters of buoys, to get deformation at different scales from, high accuracy GPS buoys. So a little different variable, but hopefully kind of gets at the stress in the sea ice.
And Ignatius, as part of that experiment, they also had an array of stress sensors. And those stress sensors just transmitted back using radio frequencies to their central camp. So it wasn't satellite based, but they've got an amazingly complete record of stress and strain.
Yeah, that's a wonderful experiment.
Great, and thank you both. Bjorn, hopefully that answered your question. We have another.
Thank you.
Great. We have another question, and this is from Igor. Igor, do you want to ask your question?
Okay, Ignatius, can you hear me?
Yes.
And one small question about study of ice circulation. Are there coordination of research or studies of ice circulation based on ice buoy drift now?
Yes. Our analysis of ice motion is based mostly on buoys, but we have started including ice satellite retrievals of ice motion. And there's a lot of other analyses like Mark Schuete's and Ron Kwok's. We all weight our different observations a little bit differently. I tend to weight the buoys better, but we definitely need satellite obs to fill in the gaps, especially on the Eurasian Arctic. Yeah, I think pretty much, I think Ron's is mostly satellite retrievals, and Mark Schuete's is a good mix of both. And then mine, I don't, we do ice retrievals, but I'm not as good as Mark is or Ron is at doing that.
Great.
Thank you.
Looks like we have a question in the chat from Mike Steele, and he's asking, where did the icebergs near Alaska come from?
So my gut feeling is they came from, so it's a big debate. My gut feeling is they came from Ellesmere Island during some calving event. Some say 2 years ago, but just knowing where my buoys are in that area, it's got to be longer than that. Like we had one buoy that came out of one of the fjords, and it's still, nowhere as close to Banks Island yet. And that was deployed in 2016. So my guess is Ellesmere Island some years before, but also there's some debate as to whether they're really icebergs or at least of land origin. When we drilled into it, even 4 feet in, there's still it was still slightly salty, and so one possibility is that you get sea spray on the ice and this percolates down through the iceberg. But yeah, so we really we weren't equipped to take a good enough a sample to really nail this down, whether it's land source or it could be rafted sea ice, but these are pretty thick slabs. The one that we looked at the most was 15 meters thick, and half a football field. So it's pretty big to be rafted sea ice. I'm not close to the idea, but my gut feeling is it's an iceberg of land origin from Ellesmere Island.
Great. And maybe somebody took some isotope samples, or I think they might be from the field this year. So maybe that will help provide a clue too.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have questions? Because I know I have a few, but I want to open it up to others. If not, I have a question for Dave. Dave, were there any unexpected finds on where some of the wooden boats ended up? Because you showed a map of where some showed up, but were there unusual places that these showed up on the shore?
I don't know what a usual place would be. But no, actually there are. I mean, if you look at, there's been, there's driftwood showing up on places, but usually they go to Iceland. Well, Iceland, it's more like, seems to be a magnet. Scotland was a little unusual, maybe. The one in Scotland. But just, just having some returns after 5 years was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And are there can we go to the website if other schools or universities want to get involved in this effort?
Well, yeah, that's a great question because that's somewhere I'd like to go with it is, yeah, opening up to, any school groups or that wants to get involved, just have them contact me and I can facilitate that. And there's a lot of ways to do it, but it's pretty simple to cut these boats, with a jigsaw.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. Great. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I have another question, but I want to still open it up to others in case they want to chime in with their questions and thoughts. Okay, this is a question for Psy. Psy, I imagine many of us won't be able to go to the Victoria and Albert Museum to see your display. So is there a website or anywhere that we can go to see some of these visualizations of your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I maintain a personal website or a portfolio website. I think Ignatius threw it in the chat, but I can throw it in there with the full URL. And then I kind of document these things, like different versions of these things, but I don't have a way to access the data live right now, and I think that would be really great. But there are some things in the works. Dunn has been really generous to support us getting some of these light sensors on the SIMB3. So I think that they up in New Hampshire, they have one of the light strings right now, and we're hoping to kind of get those out in the spring. And then the team that he's got there is really great about having the live update of the data or live access of the data. So yeah, I think it would be amazing to be able to have that a little more accessible. I basically have the temperature and light data that I run through a little chunk of code, and then that creates a JPEG. So in a kind of a perfect world, I guess you could log in and be able to see that JPEG on a daily basis and kind of see those things evolve. So we'll add that to our development plans. But yeah, that's a great question.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. It looks like we have time for 2 more questions before we get community updates. So Dave, you had your hand up and then there's a question in the chat, but Dave, why don't you go first?
Sorry, I just had a quick question. Was that the UKDIAVIK search and rescue helicopter in that photo?
Yeah, as Ignatius mentioned, they're now our official partners because they're super generous to take us out for about a 4-hour flight. I think that John worked with them for a while to make that happen, and it was really great. Ignatius, do you have anything to add?
No, yeah, this is John Woods. He's wonderful to be, to have on the team and, help us round up logistics when we need it.
That's great. Thanks. So here's a question from Jeremy, and he's asking, greetings. Does any of the equipment measure Arctic methane release? If not, are there any plans to do so?
Not by our group. It's something, so we know how to build buoys, and we could hook up almost any instrument to a Campbell logger, any sensor to a Campbell logger, and transmit it by satellite. But our core funding is mostly for meteorology and ice. And then, aerosols and methane and stuff we can build it, but it's not part of our current funding.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so we have about 9 minutes left. And so I want to open this up to everyone, to the community, to see if there are any updates you'd like to share with us and to others. This could be workshops, conferences, new papers. So does anyone have an update that they'd like to share? And don't be shy.
Dave still has his hand up.
I'm trying to take it off. Sorry.
Okay, great. I see something in the chat. This is from Dale Robinson. NOAA Polar Watch hosts the IBP buoy data on the ERDAP server, we are still reconfiguring in response to the server change at UKDIAVIK. The real-time data will be restored soon. So that sounds quite promising. Thanks.
Yeah, I didn't mention it, but our server got hacked when the gas and power things got hacked. And we've been working for the last month to, we have the server back up now, but getting a secure server was harder than I thought it should be. But we're back up and running.
Golly, that must have been a headache, or more than a headache, I imagine.
Yeah, Wendy Ermold's not on, but she, you know, she and the Applied Physics Lab IT department, you know, hopefully we're bulletproof now.
Okay, fingers crossed.
Yeah, I might have thrown the gauntlet down, so we could be in trouble.
Are there any updates people would like to share? We have a few minutes left before we wrap up the meeting. Now's your chance.
Sure. This is Meredith with IARPIC, and I just wanted to share that we're coming to the end of the current Arctic research plan. And I know that many of you have been doing research that's really vital and important to the current plan. And so I'm offering a last chance to share about your research. So I've posted a link to a post on the IARPIC website about that. If you have any questions about how to contribute your research over the last 5 years to the records for what has occurred, then just reach out to me and I'll put my email in the chat as well.
Thanks, Meredith. Oh, good. We have a paper advertisement. Thanks, Mike. This is from Mike Steele to advertise a cool new paper about ice loss in the last ice area. And there's a link to the paper in the chat. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, any other updates before we close the meeting? If not, thank you all very much for your time today. And thank you, speakers, for presenting your work. I really appreciate that. That was great to see how much you've accomplished this past year. So well done.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye, everyone. Enjoy your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.